I sent everybody a copy of Advaita Simplified. Even though it's Advaita Simplified, it really gets into the guts of from the theory into practicals. And this Advaita Simplified is a very powerful document in my view that essentially takes you step by step through different steps, various examples. It leaves all the scriptures, it quotes scriptures once in a while, but it's mostly a common sense, trying to build a case, and then eventually it concludes, I think, in a very, very powerful way, the salt doll kind of a metaphor. So that's document. Following that document itself would be a very, very good exercise for all of us. That's what I thought, and that gets into that really starts connecting with Tatvamasi in a direct way. So with that, that is my brief introduction, really, Ramesh. That's what I had in mind. So
it was Vijay's suggestion that we discuss this topic of going step by step, Advaita Simplified, and we had discussed in the past much deeper issues, but Vijay felt maybe as a little meditational exercise, we take those various steps to really focus our attention on whatever that Brahman is being pointed to in the scriptures. So the first and foremost thing is, in our day-to-day life, we do have to function as a separate individual, as if there is a world out there external to me, and I am responsible for this body-mind, which is a limited entity. Whether you take your food or go out shopping or interacting with colleagues in the office, and whatever transaction happens in this world, in this empirical world, there is a clear you with an ID, maybe your driver's license or your tax returns, whatever it is. You have responsibilities as a separate entity, and you interact with other who is obviously external to you. So this being the position, how do we relate it to that oneness Advaita talks about? Advaita at the same time doesn't ask you to stop performing any action at all, or be like a stone, dead and totally insensitive. That's not what Advaita says. It's action, all right, but it is action in inaction. That means action keeps on happening, but there is no sense of a doer. One example they give is the river flows. Who is that flowing there? There is no real entity called river, because no single molecule of water is staying at any point of time right there at any particular position or time slice. Everything is so much in the move. But who is the mover there? The river as an entity doesn't exist, but the movement is there. In fact, the movement is called as the river. If the movement is not there, you would not have called it a river at all. You would have called it a puddle or a pool or a lake or a reservoir or whatever it is. It doesn't get the name river, implying flow. So flow and the name river are synonymous. So the river flows, but there is no identifiable entity called river. So the functioning of the individual also in the empirical world, the transactional world, has to be in that fashion without the sense of the doership. So actions done without the agency of a me, without myself claiming as the owner of the various objects in the world, including the body and the mind, and also not claiming as the owner of the decisions taken to act. That way of action, without any claims of ownership for possessions or ownership or authorship for decisions, that action is inaction. INACTION as a single word, inaction. So action in inaction. In Sanskrit, they call it as Naishkarmya Siddhi. That is the ultimate teaching of all Advaitic scriptures. So as a human being, living in this body mind and transacting in the world, we perform all actions without this identification of a limited me. That means actions go on, but we don't know how they go on. The moment a little I pops up to consider himself or herself as the doer of action, you have actually separated yourself from what is out there. That means the moment the thought of a separate me comes, then the world gets created. So the beginning of creation is at that moment when the separate me gets identified. When there is no separate me, all actions are just happening in the world. That happening itself is what is, as oneness. That means even though there are two entities, just to express it as a model, I'm trying to do that. See, actually there are no two entities. Let us say, let us take this hand. If you just see the fingers, you have 4, 5 entities, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But none of these entities have any independent existence. None of them can live all by itself. If you see deeper, actually they're all interconnected. It's all oneness only. So this oneness of hand has little projections. So if these two fingers join like this, let us say there's a transaction happening between these two fingers. In this transaction of joining and separating, it looks as though there are two separate entities, but deeper down, they're all one. So if our view is confined only to this superficial empirical world, it looks as though there are two, but as a matter of fact, these two are little offshoots of the same whatever that is. So actions have to happen in that fashion. So when actions happen in that fashion, that means you as a separate individual with an idea of your own is not acting. When there is no separate you acting, then whatever happens as a result of that action, or so to say the fruits of actions, will have no effect at all on the doer. Because there is no doer, obviously there cannot be an effect on the doer when the doer himself or herself is not there. When the doer is absent and the results of the actions don't affect you, then whatever may happen or may not happen is of no concern at all. And things happen. So when things happen all by themselves in that oneness, that is the eternality of the situation or whatever is. So the eternal nature is not a dead inaction, but it is a live, ever active life. So the moment I separate myself claiming that I have done it, I have decided to do it, it is my object or my body or my thought that is controlling it. The moment this thought comes, this separation happens in the whatever that is. To reach that sort of a action in inaction, what are the steps that we have to follow? As Vijay was suggesting, the first thing we do have to know is whoever is acting, that sensitive, capable, qualified element in us, that has to be distinctly known to be different from these so-called inert material objects. Again, these are all words we are using just to convey a model. By themselves, they don't have any significance.
The question I had was, would you consider I, the ahamkara, I, the ego, also inert?
You see, if you take the actual scriptural statement, everything in the world that you see, whether it is a stone on the roadside or a plant on the in the backyard, or it's a dog shit, it doesn't matter, even a corpse, everything is consciousness only. There is nothing like inert substance. That is the final understanding we arrive at. But before we go there, you can say there is a slight distinction between what is really sentient and lively and what is insentient or inert. So accepting this sort of a little explanatory footnote, you can say this ahankara is also an inert entity only. But then a little clarification over that. This inert entity ahankara within each individual, which looks to be the center of action, is compared to a reflection in a mirror. Again, there are 2-3 major theories here. The reflection theory is followed by one particular group of Advaita teachers that is called as the Vivarana group. It was started by one of Shankara's own disciples. And there is another theory here that whatever smaller entity ahankara you are comparing is not like a reflection, but it's more like a little pot space within the totality of space. Suppose you have constructed a room which was not there in an open space. Now open space is there, and within that there is a room space which looks to be separate, but it is all within the overall space only. So now the comparison of ahankara can be given to either as a reflection in a mirror or to this little room space or a pot space within the total space. So the reflection in a mirror means there are several pieces of mirror lying around. There is one sun, but you see a sun separately in each piece. So the reflection theory says each individual being is like that reflecting mirror and feels as if there is a separate sun in each one of them, because you can see a disk of the sun in each of the pieces of the mirror. Similarly, if you have a half a dozen or a dozen pots or rooms, you have half a dozen room spaces, and all of them lie within the totality of open space itself. So whichever way you take a comparison, Ahankara shows there are certain limited qualities attributable to that. One of the such qualities is it lacks by itself the capability of sentience. So they are called then as inert. So the easiest way then to make this statement is whatever element is there which has the ability, the quality of knowing things, detecting things, that element which acts like a two-way antenna, that element is the only one which is sentient, and whatever is left, they're all insentient or inert. So ahankara, whether you take it as a reflection or as a small pot space or room space, in comparison to the totality of whatever is consciousness, we can say these are all inert. So within our own selves now, it is not the body or the mind which really have that quality of knowingness. The quality, that capability, that element, the detector element is not the body nor the mind. The detector element is something prior to both of these things. Just like the pot space or a room space has sprung up within the totality of space, right? Like that, this little element that we think we are and try to know things through that is not any independent entity. It is within the totality, and the totality has that capacity to know things. So one capacity particularly obvious is that consciousness, to be able to know things. Then second aspect is it has to exist to know things, and it knows its own existence. So that is the other quality, it exists. You have to exist to know anything at all. If you yourself don't exist, there's no question of knowing any other thing or including that you exist. So your existence is the first quality. The second quality is just being there is of no use. You have to know that you exist. So that knowingness is also your own quality. So this existence or beingness is called as sat, and the quality of consciousness, being conscious or knowing, that is called as chit. So sat and chit are defined right there, and this need not be proved from any external evidence at all. We don't have to establish it through looking for evidence that gives us a proof to say that sat and chit, knowingness and beingness, are there. If you just close your eyes and try to question yourself, am I conscious now? Am I aware now? The answer is obviously clear to you. You are right now aware. But we normally think we are aware of something. I am aware of the sounds falling in my ear. I am aware of a picture on the computer. But before you say aware of something, there is awareness in you. So try to focus your attention from that object to that being aware. So being aware is like awareness. And that awareness is there. There's no doubt in that. You cannot get a doubt. So this proof for being present and knowing things, these two are your own quality, and that is the true I. And this knowing quality and being quality don't really belong to the mind or the body. They belong to that open space like consciousness. And there is no word for it. So we give a little pointer. That pointer is Brahman for communication purposes. So the first thing that the step in that Advaita Simplified suggests is try to identify that sensor element within you and see that it is a little different, at least in the beginning steps, from the body and mind that you think you are. And some little experiments are also given there. Shall we have to play those videos or something like that?
I don't think we need to play. You can just explain what it is.
The point there is, normally we think there is a self in me, in this body mind, and when I go to bed, I sleep there, and the self again wakes up. So we identify ourselves all the time, 24/7, 365 days, that there is a self in me, and this self of mine is separate from the self present in you or the other. But the sense of self itself is so fragile. There is really no clearly identifiable, touchy-feely object or entity anywhere in our body. Whether you say it is heart or brain or anywhere, you cut open the body and try to see it, there is no self at all. And the present day neuroscientists also agree that there is no identifiable me anywhere in the body. What happens in the brain is a few neuronal clicks. Clicks means an assembly of neurons get together, and whatever autobiographical information is stored in those neurons, that information triggered by some stimulus happening in the environment create a node which we think is represented by that self, word self. So other than this notional entity of a node pulsating a particular thought, there is nothing like a self even in the brain. And that pulsating node also is not in any particular spot within the brain. It's more like a floating point mode. Certain clicks of the neurons may join together with some memories and create a self somewhere here at one time, or somewhere here at another time, or somewhere in the frontal lobe at different time. It can keep floating around. You see, when Jill Bolt Tyler wrote and talked about her own hemorrhage that happened in the left hemisphere of her brain in 1996, the idea was that the left brain functions like a uh, serial computer, step by step, logic by logic, and there is an individual sitting there, an entity identifiable as self. Whereas the right hemisphere is expected to see the overall thing, not logically deriving things, but observe the totality. So when she developed the hemorrhage in the brain of the in the left hemisphere, she lost the sense of separate self. The whole universe she felt as one. So she sort of started that idea that the left hemisphere contains the I or me or Ahankara, and the right hemisphere is the one which gives the universal totality outlook. But that has been very much later on proved to be not very correct at all. This I is not a constant uh, uh, part of any of our brain, nor is it in the heart as some of these scriptures or even Ramana they used to talk. That's only symbolically they used to express in the heart. But I is not there also. So it is totally an imaginary entity. So where exactly it is there? It is everywhere like that open space. Just as the little pot space or your room space is not in any way different from or removed from or away from the totality of the space. The moment the walls collapse, the room space doesn't have to go and merge anyway with the totality of the space. It doesn't have to move anywhere or reach anywhere or go anywhere or do any exercises or practices or repetitious mantras or anything to be with one with the totality. The walls break, it just is there wherever it is, and then it's all that totality, open space only. So this ahankara is also coming because of some walls. And who is building these walls? These walls are only imaginary walls. They are really not a clear, solid, concrete walls at all. They are just imaginary walls. If it is a solid object, you can grow with a big pickaxe or something or hammer it down or do anything. But so the so-called walls are not any concrete entities, but imaginary walls. So if you think of the pot space within the totality of space, the particular clay material that is forming a little separation between the total space and the pot space inside there, that clay material is, say, an imaginary wall. So how do you get rid of it? You just have to understand it and realize and drop that idea that I am separate. So the I am separate idea is the first foundation for building the wall. The moment I am separate itself is not there, then the wall is not there and everything happens. So the self, which I was referring to a while ago, is also that sort of an imagination. That is the foundation or the center around which this wall gets constructed, imagined. The illusory hand is a very good example to show that really what you claim as yourself is not there. For example, if I sit here and see a chair or an object in front of me, I don't claim it is me. But when I see this hand, I claim as mine. That is because of sheer habit of our way of living. There is nothing really which prohibits us not to claim as me a thing that is seen in front of you. If you place a rubber hand in front of you and obstruct your vision from your own hand with a screen, and you keep looking at this rubber hand for a few seconds, if I try to hit this rubber hand with a hammer, you feel you are being hurt. That means this rubber hand, which is not really you, simply because you continue to look at it, I think hardly for 15-20 seconds, your brain already thinks that it belongs to you. And even the temperature in the real hand falls down. This is another amazing thing. It's not merely the visual action there, even the physiological metabolic actions are getting affected slowly. If you constantly reorient and retrain the brain, it's very easily altered to consider whatever it says as mine. So it's a question of habit only that we think we have a body and this body is mine and it is separate from a thing which is external to the body. Actually, this concept of being internal and external is also totally artificial. It's a question of habit. So the moment that habit goes, then the separation goes and the oneness comes in.
But of course, every time you do get certain queries. Basically, this existence of the self is there as long as I'm alive. The feeling of existence and the feeling of knowing is only there as long as I'm alive. If I'm not there, then there's no world. So that means is the existence only for me? That is the question.
Yeah, you take this model of room space versus the open space. See, you have gone to a new building development area. You find all open open spaces only around. There are no walls, no buildings, no premises demarcated. Nothing at all. It's just a big, flat, open area. Now you construct a small room in some place within the totality of the area. Now tell me or think yourself how this space within the room is different from the totality of the space, either in its qualities or in its content or in its descriptors, if you can have description. The space itself, does it differ within or inside the room and outside that room, the walls of outside the walls of the room? There cannot be any difference. Now, suppose you break these walls to construct a new building there or a different uh, structure there, more with architectural beauty, again a new confined space arises. Now, what happened to that earlier room in your definition? It has lost its own world. When it lost its own world, did anything happen to the world at all, to the open space? Did, did that room space move or go anywhere? It has neither gained nor lost anything. Similarly, the imaginary self, if it thinks it is dead, it's not that the world has ended, that separation has gone. That is why, a Jivan Mukta, an individual who is liberated right in this life, he is said to be dead at that very moment when he is liberated. So the death of the physical body of that liberated individual is only just a happenstance in the course of nature of the things. So it's not his death at all. His death is identified with the death of the ego of that individual. In fact, love is really defined in terms of the death of the separate individual. So the death of the separate individual never alters, changes, or modifies, or brings in totality of the world. The world, whatever is thinks that it is separate and confined, they're all always one. And they will always be like that. In the open space, there was no structure. You built a small room, then the room has arisen in the open space. You destroyed the room is dead. You built a new house there. So new structure, new confined space has come in. So with the death of that room, nothing has changed, either in the space or in the totality of the space.
But sir, sorry.
Yeah.
In the room space example, or the total space, both are separate. I mean, you can visualize the small room also, the walled room also, and you can visualize the non-walled, open, infinite space as well. How do I attach? How is the I part of it attached to the first? Why do we say that the small room is me? How is I space? How is that small room me? Why is that? Why do we link
Why
the
do we
example of the
think
yes?
ourselves as confined? Is that the question? Why should we feel, or why this feeling of a separate me arise at all? Is that your question?
No.
Oh,
My question is basically with reference to the example. We are saying that the small room is like me, and I become the totality. So, with reference to the room, I cannot associate I-ness to the small room. I'm not able to, in my mind at least. I'm not able to associate
okay.
a link between the small room and I-ness.
Yeah. Okay. Let me clarify by a bit here. When we refer to me or I, there are two aspects there. Let us distinguish these two with capital I and a small I. The actual quality of knowingness and beingness that we discussed a while ago, they are the true I, which has the ability to sense, to know, to understand, to do anything. That's the only eternal everlasting element. Let us call that as capital I. But now you also built a little small structure within that, and you gave a capacity to that small structure to preserve its form. So this small structure then developed a few of its own tricks of survival. What is the survival about? The survival about is not about that consciousness and beingness. The attempt of the survival is only in the continuity of the form. That means that little room which has come up will always keep trying to retain its shape, to resist its own collapse. It resists you destroying it. So in order to retain its own form and structure, in its own attempt for survival, it imagines that it is a separate entity, and to refer to that little separate entity, the small I comes in, and it uses that I there. It's a bit unfortunate that we have the same I for both indications there, but the larger I is the basic element, unconfined, not belonging to anybody. But this little I, which functions for the protection and survival of that small entity, limited entity, is the smaller I. Okay? So the smaller I has a responsibility to preserve the form. So these two I's need not be confused.
The smaller I, the ego, I'm able to know I exist. So that is why I say that I am the consciousness, because I have the capacity to know, and I have the capacity to say I exist, because I know even in darkness, in a room of darkness,
Right.
if there is total darkness and I with my eyes closed, I know I cannot see anything, but I know I exist. So that knowledge is when expanded. So I'm really that consciousness.
You see, that
I'm
when you say, I know,
yeah.
that knowing quality, specifically that knowing quality, that knowing quality is not merely confined to the body or the mind. Like the space is there, right? Except for the walls of the room, is there any difference between the space within the room and the space outside? Both allow anything to happen within them, right? The room space also allows anything to come in or go. People may come in and beat each other, or they may come in and love each other. This space has no relation at all to what happens there. So also the space outside. So the quality of permitting everything that happens, that specific quality, does it belong to the room only, room space only? So that specific quality, if you take, of allowing everything that happens there, is a quality of the space itself that is not restricted to the room space, or it doesn't belong to the room space, and it is not something that belongs only to the open space. That is the quality of space itself. So this
But
knowingness is a quality of that open I, capital I.
the capital I is not supposed to have any attributes. Again and again, we are told that it
Yes.
is totally without attributes, totally without anything. It cannot be incomprehensible. There's no word for it. then
No, no,
you
don't
cannot
go
even
for,
imagine.
don't go for
Okay,
those definitions. You see, that will be
okay,
a wrong route to approach this.
okay,
Uh, you think of that. You see, okay, let me again come back to this usual example I gave. TV antenna. You see a Punjabi program or a Bharatanatyam from Chennai. Does the capacity of the antenna to capture a specific program depend upon the type of program it captures? No. It can capture a sad program of death, or it can capture a program of marriage and jubilation, celebration, or it may catch the program of a funeral. It makes no difference for the quality of capturing the message, right? That ability to sense, detect, that is not related to the type of program, duration of the program, the form of the program, content of the program. They have nothing to do with that element. You see that? That particular quality by its own nature, you can't say it has any descriptors at all. But the moment you see what is captured by it is a Punjabi program of a marriage celebration or a Bhangra dance, you can come with those descriptors. It is a different language, and compare it to some other thing and say this is dressed differently, these colors are different, this language or content is sad or happy. All these things come when you take the object that is captured. But that capturing element itself doesn't have any descriptors. How do you describe that capturing capacity of a signal? You cannot give it any weight. You cannot give it any length or breadth or the limit in time or space. The element itself doesn't have any describable qualities. If you can imagine by antenna, not the rod, but that quality, that sensibility, sensitivity, by itself, it doesn't have any words to describe. It just has that capacity, that live ability to capture signal. Like this, Brahman has that basic capacity to know things. And that knowing element is not limited by any words. So we don't go with the approach of infinite. It knows infinite. No, it doesn't know even infinite. We think of some limits and unlimited thing, infinite thing. That is that mind which thinks. For Brahman, infinite, limited make no sense at all. So if you approach with that angle of it is infinite, indescribable, it leads us nowhere. Better to think of it in terms of that element only, not in these descriptors. In fact, you can say Brahman is limited also. That's why they say it is of the size of a subatomic particle, or it can be as huge as any infiniteness you can imagine. Only to negate any form that your mind conceives, they bring in these terms. This question keeps, Vijay also keeps raising this question of Nirgun, Nirakar and all that. See, these words are used mainly to demolish any conceptual entity that you keep in your mind. When you start with some idea of infiniteness and try to look for that infiniteness in Brahman, you cannot understand it at all. So instead of starting from the infinite end, you just try to capture that element, that sensing ability, and see if you can use any word at all. You cannot. So even if we say it is limitless, normally we think all things of certain limits only. When it becomes too huge, too infinite, our mind cannot think at all. So to tell our mind that it is something which cannot be thought by you, they use this word infinite. Similarly, whenever you think of an object, you think with some form. If there is no form, you can't conceive an object. Suppose I say gold. What comes to your mind immediately? You think either of an ornament or a ball of gold or a nugget in odd shapes, some lustrous, yellowish, shining. These lustrous, yellowish, shining, they're all descriptors. Shining metal with some form, with some shape. Your mind cannot think, cannot imagine an object having no shape, no dimensions, no limitations. Suppose I say some ziziboo. What does it convey to you? The ziziboo doesn't mean anything at all to you because it has no form, no quality which can be attributed to it as red, blue, yellow, orange. No size dimensions like 5 feet, 10 feet, 15 feet. When there is nothing to describe, no smell, no taste, how do you say what it is? So mind cannot capture it at all. So to shock the mind or to uh, make the mind dumb, these words are used as infinite, formless, unimaginable. By themselves, they don't describe anything at all. They only demolish what is conceived in your mind. So instead of trying to imagine an object in an objective way, a form of infinity, a form of formlessness, it doesn't exist. A form of formlessness doesn't exist. But the word, unfortunately, formlessness becomes an objective identification for us. So don't go to that terrain at all, but try to capture that sense. In fact, the scriptures also tell us that the mind can never know Brahman. So I and you, or even the greatest of sages, Ramana or Vyasa, doesn't matter, Shankara, whoever it is, as that limited entity can never capture Brahman. You can never understand Brahman as a separate entity. Retaining my own personal limited identity, I can never understand what Brahman is. So it is totally useless to attempt to understand it. Like suppose you've got 5 rooms in your house. You are stretched and relaxing in your bedroom on a beautiful bed, very comfortable, AC is on, everything cozy. Now you want to feel the experience of the totality of the house while lying down on your 3x6 bed. How will you do it? If you want to see the totality of the house, either you get out of the room and see the house and get the feel of the totality of the house. Otherwise, you don't. If you are sitting in your bedroom, that's all what you can see. But if you say that I will experience the totality of the house just lying on my bed, it doesn't happen. Vedanta gives another usual analogy here. The scriptures give this analogy more beautifully. Like a moth trying to taste the burning flame. The moth is attracted to the flame and zooms towards that flame burning there. But the moment the moth touches the flame, the moth is burnt. It can never taste the flame. Like that, this Brahman is something which cannot be understood by this moth-like mind. Symbolically, the moth dies and the mind also ends. And I was talking about love a while ago. The ego's death is love. You see, when two individuals are so much in love, I think Brihadaranyaka Upanishad gives this comparison, like a husband and wife cooperating together. At that moment of orgasm, they've lost any sense of a separate me there. But the world has not ended. The individual's separate ego is not anymore there with its own boundaries being imagined. That specific moment, the moment a sense of pleasure comes, oh, because of my wife or spouse or husband, whoever it is, I got this pleasure, then the individual separation is arising. But the moment of peak enjoyment, there is no sense of a me, separate me, and a sense of other being there. That's why Brihadaranyaka Upanishad gives a rough comparison there. It's very, very rough. Why is it rough comparison? Because in this sexually triggered enjoyment, there is a sensation involved, sensation of touch, sensation of thought, a big surge of oxytocin and other things, hormones in your body. These are triggered by those things, and that's why that moment happens. But we'll not get into the physiology of it. But here it's not sensory dependent happiness like that. In Brahman, when that happens, when the walls of separation collapse, it's not sensorially excited, altered state of the consciousness. It is its own natural state. And that natural state is that pure love of oneness. So the moment ego dies, what happens is oneness prevails. There is no question of a world. You don't identify individual changing objects which define the world. What is our concept of world? Jagat is jayate gacchati iti jagat, as Sanskrit definition says. Things that keep on moving, changing, altering. That is the world. That means there are number of objects. The totality is divided, fragmented into multiple things. So world as we conceive consists of multiple objects, and they are always changing. That means there is a time element. There is a change laterally from object to object, and temporally from yesterday to today to tomorrow and so on. So this bifurcation of the totality, either on a time dimension or on spatial dimension, makes the world. So when at the moment of the orgasm, I mean, everything is as it is there. Nothing has disappeared except for the egos of the individuals. So also the world or anything doesn't disappear with the death of the ego. Only the separating walls collapse. So the form changes. The separate components of the world will disappear. The separations will disappear. See, let me give you another example. You see a beautiful wall painting. When you see from distance, you see nice colors, beautiful layout of a garden, a lady there, or a park, or a waterfall. It looks so attractive. It's, you know, effusing so much of a beauty. You fall in love with it. And as you go nearer and nearer, nearer and nearer, what happens? The more close you become to the the more close you come to the painting, you begin to see little brush strokes. Even you can see individual strands. The beauty is all gone. You see only fragments there. So looking at the world is like looking at these little bits and pieces. Whereas looking at that beauty, each of these little colors, all these things, they merge into the totality of oneness. So world is nothing but Brahman when this fragmentation ends. Fragmentation comes by the construction of walls. And the walls are not really there. They are not solid things. They are just imaginary conceptual entities conceived by that little I, which has a bounden duty to protect that form. So let us not confuse this little I with its own responsibility of protecting a given form with the totality of the I, which is indescribable, for which we can't give any words at all. Does it clarify or?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
One idea that I got out of this little piece you had of 15 minutes, 20 minutes is maybe instead of neti, why not we say, when I look at a pen, I say, yeah, it is Brahman only. You look at, it is a Brahman only. This is all, every piece is Brahman. Even me is Brahman. It's all, except since I'm looking at it, it is looking at, but in reality, it is Brahman only. So instead of neti, you say yes to everything. It's neti says no to everything. Anything you say, anything you conceive, anything you perceive, anything you feel is no. That is not Brahman. That is not Brahman. Why not we shift that and say that everything is, this is all Brahman only. This piece is.
Yeah, you're right. In fact, says Vasishtha advises this. There are, he says, three ways, as you said, to look at this world. One way is, I am everything in this world. Another is, everything is me. The third is the separate. I am separate and the world is separate. He says, Vasishtha said, that the third view, that I am separate and I see a world outside me, that's the only thing that is wrong. The other two ways of looking at it, either I am the world or everything in the world is me, both are equally good for practice purposes, for reorientating our habitual pattern of the mind. You can adopt any of these three ahankara based approaches. All these three are ego based approaches, but the first two, thinking that I am the world or everything in the world is me, both are approved, accepted approaches as per Yoga Vasishtha. The third one is the only dangerous one which we have to avoid. So you're absolutely right. You can, if you feel comfortable that way, do that, but don't objectify Brahman also. If you try to see Brahman in individual objects, you will fail. You're bound to fail.
Yeah.
Because to see an individual object, I must have first separated myself from the totality. So before I say, I am seeing a tree there, I am seeing a picture there, this I as a separate entity has already arisen. The first thing that has come up is this separate I. Then this separate I is seeing the other. Now, I have seen the other as a separate thing, an object. And if I say that is Brahman, so I already compounded the mistake of objectifying things. I have identified an object where it is not there, it is all one. And then I am trying to say that object is Brahman. So I am trying to codify Brahman within the limits of that object I am saying. So the better attempt is look for those qualities of Brahman. If Swami Vijayaranya says, there are 5 qualities in every object. 3 of them belong to Brahman, consciousness, and 2 belong to that body, that object. So actually, object has more qualifications than Brahman. What are those 5? The 3 that belong to Brahman are Sat, Chit, and happiness. Ananda. Ananda is a bad word. Let us say infiniteness. Beingness, consciousness, and infiniteness. And the 2 that are specific, that belong only to that object, they are the name and form.
Yeah.
So if you see any object, try to decompose these 5 elements in that and look for these first 3 which are Brahman. The moment the other 2 gets tagged, it becomes an independent object. And that independent object will never be equal to Brahman. So don't look at that objective part of it, that descriptor elements which define it as a separate fragmented entity. You look for the other things, and those things you cannot really describe. How do you describe just beingness? It's a word we are using. I am, the desk is, the dog shit is, everything is, and it's a form of isness. So you cannot define it as this, but you can get it a feel of that isness.
Right.
Like that US Supreme Court judge said once, you know it when you see it, but you can't express it.
This, but you say you only focus on these Satchit Anand and don't focus on name and form. That is your advice. Who is this advice to?
Whoever is asking that, whoever is
Got you.
having that doubt.
Okay.
So don't try to identify them.
Right.
So never try to put a pointer to them. So there is that feeling, a thought has come that I want to say. Then we are trying to, sort of steer that focus onto something that actually that is not really focusing to anything outside. It is actually turning the focus around in a figurative sense.
Right.
So the moment this somebody who is trying to see is looking at these aspects, that separate sphere gets dissolved. He loses his or her own separation, like the salt doll entering into the ocean to measure its depth. If it wants to see the entire ocean and feel it and enters the ocean, where is the salt doll? Likewise, this separate entity who thinks I am seeing Brahman in every object, if that attention is focused on these first 3 qualities, that entity which is trying to see it dissolves.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah. Please. Yeah.
Yeah, that Advaita Simplified I received is an excellent briefing that you have given us. I liked it very much. I went through it completely.
Oh, you did. Good.
And it's very good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.